Hi, and welcome to one of our last Ger Toshav classes of Ger Class, Ger series. I am your host, Rabbi David Katz. And when I say this is one of our last ones, I am flying to Texas very soon, and we're stopping class tomorrow. There will be no more classes after tomorrow, except for this class, which will continue on Wednesdays. And then we'll pick up the classes in the yeshiva when I get back from the trip. And we're going to finish out the Ger Toshav work, I guess, this week, next, and maybe another week, whatever it is. And then Wednesday nights will be dedicated to thinking about conversion, or better understood, understanding the Ger sugia. We have penetrated the Ger Toshav sugia for about 8 years. And now we're on a 10-year trek to explore Ger Tzedek, because they really go hand in hand. And to understand Ger Tzedek, you need Ger Toshav. And to understand Ger Toshav, you need Ger Tzedek. For example, in the conversion world, there's something called Beis Din. Type 1 if you've ever heard of Beis Din. Type 1 if you've ever heard of Beis Din. And in the Ger Toshav world, there's some kind of modified Beis Din. Type 1 if you've ever heard of this kind of Beis Din in Ger Toshav stuff. And the Ger Tzedek world wants to always ask the Ger Toshav world, well, how do you have Beis Din? There's no Beis Din today for a Ger Toshav. So for the Ger Toshav to understand his own world, such as Beis Din, you need the Ger Tzedek sugia. And you'll say, I'm not interested in converting. Well, that's fine, but you are interested in converting, and I'll prove it to you. How many of you have ever been asked by a person if you're thinking about converting? One or two? Okay, so it's happened. Lars, I'm sure somehow you've heard of this concept. And therefore, whether or not you agree with their notion, by definition, they're putting you in a thought construct that you have two choices now. You can either speak Greek, or you can understand where that question is coming from. And it seems to me that question is inevitable. Type 1 or 2 if you agree or disagree. So it's inevitable. So again, you can put your fingers in your ears and say, I don't hear you. Or you can learn what the Havamina is, where they're coming from. In the Ger Tzedek world, how many of you have ever met a non-Jew who is just absolutely determined, so they think they're just going to convert? They don't know why, but they are converting. How many of you have ever met people like this? And they are officially thinking about converting. And you're trying to talk to them about the greater construct of Ger. Don't you think it would be good for you to know where they're at and to be able to speak to them in terms they understand of why they think they're thinking about converting? 1 or 2. And the Ger Tzedek world needs to understand the Ger Toshav world, which I think we've accomplished that in these 8 years. I think enough people are talking about Ger, that the Ger Tzedek world at least begrudgingly talks about Ger Toshav. But now the Ger Toshav world needs to talk about Ger Tzedek. And when everyone is talking about Ger, then I think things can move a little bit, right? Then there's a dialogue between the two. Because again, there is a gray area where the non-convert and the potential convert, they overlap, right? You have a Beis Din, they have a Beis Din. They have a Kabbalah, you have a Kabbalah. They have a rabbi, you have a rabbi. And so there's a lot of this overlap. And the dialogue has to be complete on both sides for there to be a proper dialogue. So the Ger Tzedek venture that we're going on after the trip is going to be just like with Ger Toshav. What did we effectively do with Ger Toshav? Ross, you were there from the beginning. What did we do? We identified it. In fact, Ross started it. We can all blame and point to Ross for starting this. When he asked, can a Noahide, a Ben Noach, keep Shabbos? And young Rabbi David Katz, at that time, we've all heard the story. I went to the sources, and it seemed to me that there was a non-Jew called a Ger Toshav who keeps Shabbos. And it was never implied a Jewish Shabbos. Ross, did I ever imply to you that Shabbos was a Jewish Shabbos way back in 2011? Was that ever implied? No. So even before the controversy and my diabolical ploys and plots to take over the world, it's a bit ironic that in my initial conception of this, when I made it up, I never included it to be a Jewish Shabbos. That's a little peculiar, don't you think? Because that was never, we've been sticking to the sugia the whole time. But whatever we saw back then, and it's the same things we see now, Creases 9a, the Ten Commandments, all these things, that we saw that it was a sugia. And then it became more questions, more Parsha Shavua, right? More in the Parsha, we saw Ger Toshav. And then we wrote basically a book series. Only one book has come out so far, Sul Mazel. I'm still looking for an editor to do that, or 4 books. And apparently this Ger Toshav character isn't like every Parsha. And when I say like, obviously it's not in Bereshis, where there was not Sinai yet. But more or less, the Ger Toshav is everywhere. How's that possible? If I made it up, how's that possible? And so we dug and we dug and we dug and we dug it out. And then World of the Ger came out, and people got upset because Ger means convert, they thought. And then the controversies began, more or less when I moved to Modine. It got a little rough in terms of Facebook mudslinging. And then Laws of Ger Toshav came out. And then you know what broke loose. And that's where we are today. The fighting has basically ended, I think. That's the way it seems like. I hope so. It's not worth fighting over. But the bottom line is we mapped out and found the Ger Toshav Sugya. And once we found the Soloveitchik work, we realized that it's not about who's a Ger or a Ger Toshav. I'm a Ger Toshav. It was never about I'm a Ger Toshav. Ross, was it ever about you were the Ger Toshav? Was that ever what the theme was? No, it was not that. We were interested and amazed about how much literature in the Torah tradition was about the Ger non-Jew. And it was just an easy reference to say the word, okay, Ger, the Gerim in this verse, the Gerim in that source. And again, by the end of the project, we had established that it's just a sugya, right? There's a lot of sugyas in the Torah. There's a sugia of offerings. There's a sugia of weddings. There's a sugia of how to tie your shoes. Everything in the Torah and the Talmud has a sugia. And that's what learning Torah is digging out sugias. And we dug out a huge sugya. And the convert world seems to be, I'll say, ignorant of the fact that there's a Ger Tzedek sugya. And they don't even seem to be interested or quoting from their own sugya. So when they ask their questions from the half-learned aspect of their sugya, it occurred to me there's a Ger Tzedek sugya. We can thank Russell and Mike for bringing us into the Ger Tzedek camp. Since the Ger Tzedek, we can thank for attacking so much that we realized there was a camp. And so the more I started looking into Ger Tzedek, I realized it's a fantastic sugia. It's like the sister to or brother, whatever, to Ger. And Ger ends up being one massive sugia. Whether it's Ger Toshav, Ger Tzedek, Ger Shar, Ger Gamor, there's just this thing called Ger. And we've done a good half of it. And now I intend to map out the other half. Now, is that for the sake of we want conversions? No. Do we want Ger Toshav ins? No. It was never about Ger Toshavs or Ger Tzedeks, right? It was never about that. It was about the fascination with the sugia, and this sugia applied to these types of people that reject shituv. This sugia applies to those people who convert. But at the end of the day, they're just sugias, and they're both interesting to learn. So as much as we believe the Ger Toshav sugia, which should be interesting for potential converts to learn, lest they may choose to not convert, the Ger Toshav world can learn from the Ger Tzedek sugia to better understand their own coordinate and other coordinates. Now, what's fascinating in the Ger Tzedek sugia, and it's standard, just like the Ger Toshav sugia is standard, and that is that a convert converts through three things: mikvah, mila, and korban. Circumcision, ritual, bath, dunking, and a sacrifice to the temple. Just like the original Jewish people at Sinai converted into the covenant of the Kahal with those three things, the Torah says, like y'all converted, so they'll convert in the end later on. So a potential convert would have to go through those three things. When there was a temple, they would circumcise, they would mikvahsize, then they would offer a korban, and only after the korban would they be permitted into the kahal, Jacques. Until the korban, no kahal. You couldn't marry a Jew and have a Jewish child until you brought your korban. And the halacha is today that while there's no Beis Hamikdash, a convert has to have in mind to bring a korban. And therefore they have a pending status. They've gone through Gior, they've mikvahsized and circumcised, but they've not brought a korban. So their Gior is Gior, they're no longer a Nachri, but they are pending on their Jewish status, in that theoretically today they could not eat holy food if it existed. Now, I couldn't eat holy food today if it existed either, because I am impure, as is everybody in the world. Every Jew is impure. We would all have to bring a korban, or go the red heifer. But as Mike and I are learning, as a Jew, a natural-born Jew, I am from the inside, and now I'm on the outside. The convert was never on the inside. He was always on the outside, and now he's trying to convert to the inside, but he cannot convert to the inside while there's no korban. So he meets the Jewish people halfway as they are outside their own camp due to impurity. He converts into their impurity. We call that the Jews. As the Bnei Yisrael moniker should more appropriately go to a connotation of temple consciousness, Torah A, which we don't have today. So the rabbis then say, if there's no temple and if there's no korban, do we accept converts today? Can one even convert this way? And the answer is they determine yes, even though they still have a pending status vis-a-vis their ability to eat an offering, theoretically. we are to have the institutions of conversions still going from the original based in X amount of thousands of years ago. Which begs the many, many, many questions. What is conversion? Now, we know it's not totally Jewish, Izrahi, native, because they have not brought a korban. So therefore, they still are not indigenous in the third holy house of Israel. They are in the fourth house of Ger, non-holy, but they have been granted permission to enter the third holy house. They obviously cannot marry a Cohen. And when we say permission, they don't dwell there. They have permission to go there. Much like a Ger Toshav doesn't have to live in Israel, but he is permitted to live in Israel. And there are many, many questions concerning the Ger convert now. Is his conversion a mitzvah on the Beis Din, or is it on his own? Is he Jewish in that the korban was only necessary for the temple, and now without a temple it is not necessary? Or do we say the temple is absolutely necessary and he is only pending to be a Jew? He's just fundamentally not an Achri. And there's no answer to these questions, even though we have the Psak Halacha. We say he's a Jew bekol davar, in every way. But that is a bit of tricky language, because what does it mean he's Yisrael bekol davar? He's like Israel in every matter. It's a half-truth. He can do 613. He can marry a Jew and have a Jewish child, but he is still under a pending status vis-a-vis his offering. He cannot marry a Cohen. She cannot marry a Cohen. And there are many, many different nafkaminas. But because Israel exists in a Torah B environment without the temple, the nafkaminas are so few that it doesn't matter that he's technically pending, and therefore the halacha treats him practically like a Jew in every matter. Ki Yisrael bekol davar. Because the halacha is speaking in a time without a temple. If there was a temple, he would have to bring an offering. Then again, we ask the question, while there's no temple, is there even a mandate for the offering? The majority opinion seems to think, yes, he would really need to bring a korban. Therefore, he's more pending than not pending. The difference is if the temple is the only reason to bring a korban, and today, while there is not a temple, there is no need to bring a korban, he would be very little pending at all. And again, we hold he is more pending than little pending. So the questions are many, virtually unanswerable, but we have the answers that are sufficient that can conduct the affairs of conversions. Now, the Av Beis Din, it is his duty to be a Talmud Chacham in these matters. But the Beis Din consists of 3. And we do not mandate that the other 2 be Talmidei Chachamim. They don't even have to know much. Even the Av Beis Din doesn't have to be a huge scholar. A regular Hediyot rabbi can do. Because the question could be asked, if they have to be a scholar, that is because the original Beis Dins were scholars, and we cannot, a lower Beis Din cannot override a previous Beis Din. So they ruled that the Beis Din started it thousands of years ago, and because it's in motion, we don't have to be huge scholars to do conversions today. We can just run the factory today, and this is why most conversion rabbis that you find on Facebook don't know the first thing about the matters of conversion outside of how to make a Gentile into a quasi-Jew. In terms of learning the Halarka, in terms of trying to sound Jewish and act Jewish, when you go before Beis Din, and the rabbi says, "Hey, John, how you doing?" And he says, "I'm doing quite fine. How are you, Rabbi?" Rabbi says, I'm not doing too bad. So tell me, why do you want to be a Jew?" And the guy says, "Well, I feel Jewish in my heart, and I feel an affinity with the Jewish people. When I left the church 36 years ago, I made a decision that I would be identify with the people of Israel." If you sound like that in Beis Din, you will be turned out very quickly. You're not converting, and you will continue to pay your $500 a month. Now, conversely, Moshe goes to Beis Din. He already changed his name to Moshe from Peter, and the rabbi says, "All right, Moshe, tell us why do you want to be a Jew?" He says, "Because David HaMelech says in Tehillim, the closeness of Hashem is what is good in this world." They'll say, "Okay, here we go, Moshe. Have your schnapps and herring. You're a full yid. Welcome to the tribe." Right? The conversion rabbi's job is the latter and not the former. It is not to learn the sugias and inyonim of the Ger Tzedek sugia, certainly not to remind them of their pending duty of Korban Ger, type 1. This is where we're going to be over the next 10 years. And I mean that. It's already been 8 years of Ger Toshav. And that is learning the Ger Tzedek sugia in all of these little nooks and crannies until we know it as well as Ger Toshav. All right, so now that is a little intro to Ger Tzedek, and we're standing before the Weiss document. We finished it last week with Justin, and we typed it nicely with the help of Rivka and Jacques and Delia. And now I've made notes that I didn't get to one note today because that's just how it is, and I have 23 notes. And I went through, and we'll do it over the next couple of weeks. By the way, it's Lag BaOmer right now, so happy Lag BaOmer as we learn the mysteries of the Torah. And we're going to go over each of my notes over the next couple of weeks. And the notes are to ask the impossible questions, just like the Ger Tzedek sugia. So I will ask you the first question. And let's preface this with what Rabbi Weiss said in the video itself. He said we're going to learn Ger Toshav vis-a-vis Abraham and Sarah making Gerim. And he said these matters are very not nogeya to la halacha l'maisa. Now, like with everything in Torah, until you really know the sugia, you don't know the context. I thought I knew the context of Rabbi Weiss until very recently, when he said these are not very nogeya to halacha l'maisa. These are not practical to practical halacha. It's because the nature of his shiur is to ask the many and myriad of impossible questions. Once you have impossible questions, by definition, it is not nogeya to halacha l'maisa. Now, you'll say Ger Tzedek has impossible questions, so how come we entertain Ger Tzedek in halacha? And the answer is, we have an industry of making converts. So the rabbis have had 2,000 plus years of formulating the hilchos of conversions in a way that it's not ideal to make a factory out of it and make rigid halachas due to the grandiose nature of the sugia, i.e. they had rabbis once upon a time had to figure out, what do we do with the korban? What do we do with the temple? How does a convert convert? All these different things. They've worked out the halacha. We have not been even close to a Ger Toshav person until a couple of years ago. So the rabbis were not sitting over their books and Beis Dins making halacha l'maisa. So the impossible questions of Ger Toshav never materialized into hilchos, And the impossible questions of Ger Tzedek that are still impossible, they just don't ma'akiv, they don't hold back the practical halacha. So even though I don't know what Korban Ger is or does, because the rabbi said Korban Ger doesn't matter today, so we say, okay, so you know what? You can be a convert and it doesn't matter. But then you get into B'diavad Lecharchila. Lecharchila, the convert should have in mind Korban Ger, says the Rambam. B'diavad, okay, you don't have to. But it's still an impossible question. What is the essence of Korban Ger? But there is a practical halacha despite the impossible, grandiose nature to it. And with Ger Toshav, we say the impossible questions. Well, how does a Ger Toshav do Kabbalah? And it never dripped and formulated into a halacha l'maisa. We don't have an institution for making Kabbalahs with Ger Toshavs. So when Rabbi Weiss said it's very not nogeya to halacha l'maisa, what he's saying is it just has not become a standard procedure in Judaism to make Ger Toshav, like it is to make Ger Tzedek. Does that mean there is no Ger Toshav today? No, it does not mean that. It just means it is not a refined factory like conversions. There's a lot of things that we can do today that are just not refined into an easy path despite the complex nature of it. How about Kohanim? Kohanim, as I am one, is very unknowable. And some things they've made into practical halacha with the Kohen. Others they don't touch with a 10-foot pole because it's not nogeya to halacha l'maisa. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist today. And I'll tell you something. I suffer the Kohen as much as you suffer Ger. As a Kohen, people just don't know how to handle my situations. Some they do, most they don't. Same with you. Right? They would rather call me a Jew than a Kohen because out of ease. We would rather call you a Ben Noach than a Ger out of ease. So here's the first impossible question. We call these sfeikas. And there's an X amount of sfeikas with Ger Toshav. Ma das or ma dat shel gimel chaverim. A Ger Toshav stands before gimel chaverim and rejects shituf. Shitus Rebbe Meir of Avodah Zorah 64b. Now we say dat, dalid taf. Whenever you hear me say dat, do not think das, dalid ayin taf. It's dalid taf dat, religion. There's something called religion, like the true religion of the Talmud. How we can affect a transformation in this world. Right? A conversion is a religious ceremony. Marriage is a religious ceremony. You are fundamentally changing someone's soul. Now, we're not saying you get a new soul. We're not saying what we're saying is you are changing the soul. The Torah has the ability to change souls. When you kill somebody, God forbid, you become from a regular person to a murderer. When you divorce, you were married in your soul. Now you are a grusha in your soul. So the souls always change. They're always in transformation. Religion is the map and terrain of when a soul goes through change. A convert changes from Nachri level of awareness in his neshama to Ger Tzedek in his neshama. And the change is effective. He actually now can marry a Jewish woman and have a Jewish child. Or a Jewish man and have a Jewish child. A Ger Toshav did not go through such a change. But the Ger Toshav goes through a change, what we call is the beginning of conversion. Don't call it a half conversion or thinking of conversion. It's called the very beginning of conversion, where they go out from Nachri to Ger, which is Ger Toshav, by rejecting Shituf with a Kabbalah before a Beis Din Gimel Chaverim And that question is, what is the religion of Gimel Chaverim? A convert based in is a beit din with mishpat ksivbei. Mishpat was written about them. The beit din is actually performing a law, a verdict, a din, with the Shekhinah present in the action. That is why they are called to come under the wings of the Shekhinah. But it asks another impossible question. Was the mishpat for the convert or for the Jewish beit din themselves? And there's no good answer. So by Ger Toshav, assuming there is one, and there is one, we're asking the suffix, what is the dot of the Gimel Chaverim? What are they effectively doing? What are the Gimel Chaverim doing? What are they causing? What are they doing? What effect do they have? What level of responsibility is in their religion? What are they operating? What are they closing? How does it work? What is the function? Type 1 if you hear this how many sfeikis are in that one question. And that doesn't mean, so it's a question we can't answer. There must not be a Ger Toshav today. No, that's not what we say, because I can ask you 40,000 questions on Ger Tzedek. Are we going to say there's no Ger Tzedek today? The question is just a question. And all it does is it perplexes and stymies our action. Now, the rabbis were motivated to formulate answers for Ger Tzedek nonetheless. And today we are motivated to find the answers for Ger Toshav nonetheless. That doesn't mean it never existed before today. It just didn't get ink on paper like Ger Tzedek did. Because they're not going to write for a ghost. 600 years ago, it didn't exist in practicality. But it existed in practicality in that it could have existed. There just wasn't one around. Just like today, if a Nazarite came from Antarctica, we would have to see what's going on. All of the Torah's freaky friends potentially exist. It's just that the conversion was instituted and not many others were. But now that they have arrived, legitimately, there's a need to think into these questions and provide a practical halacha to make it easier for Jews and non-Jews to continue going forward. Now, does that mean we cannot go forward if we don't have it made easy? It does not mean that. It just means the questions are still being entertained, whereas in Ger Tzedek, people have stopped entertaining the questions. They've moved on to practical halacha, but the questions still exist. Eventually, the Ger Tzedek questions must be answered. So they didn't get out of it. And we're going to now see from the Weiss document many of these questions that I find them to be fantastic and exciting and mind liberating. And from the articulation and going over them, it'll arouse the intellect to really get into Ger Toshav and Ger and prepare us for Ger Tzedek, which is the same thinking, and that same thinking is what will get you more prepared in the greater Ger sugia. So we've concluded today with understanding Weiss's opening words, background of the situation, Ger Toshav and Ger Tzedek, pre-post temple, and we opened up with the major suffix, what is the religion of Gimel Chaverim? And I don't have an answer. And there are no answers. Just like with Ger Tzedek, what do we do with no temple and Korban and Ger? We don't know. Now we can speculate, but it doesn't have to come into practical halacha. What we know is there are Gimel Chaverim. You go before Gimel Chaverim and you reject Shituf, and you are Ger Toshav. That's the answer. What we're asking is, what was happening with those Gimel Chaverim? What was the religion? Now, and that's a question for the scholars. And we will ask that. We will, in fact, get into that. But right now, we're going to conclude. We asked the first question. And next week, we're going to ask ourselves, What is the concept of realizing religion? What is that concept of chidushei dat? Is it wrong to do chidushei dat? Who does chidushei dat? How does it work? So to understand the Gimel Chaverim in their dot, we have to understand what is the process of uncovering dot. Justin Becker, can you please make a note for next week to remind me that we spoke about Gimel Chaverim in their dot, and this week we're going to ask, how do we uncover dot? All you have to tell me is that one bleeds into number 2 on my list. That we asked 1, and now we ask 2 based on 1. Can I get a 1 or 2? No pun intended. Can I get a 1 or a 2, Justin Becker? There you go. All right, it's a very subtle question. It's going to require a subtle memory triggery. Triggery? Memory? I don't know what that is. A triggering of the memory. That's all she wrote. Enjoy the updates of the website. More coming. And I hope you enjoy the class series before we get on the trip. Again, when we come back, it'll be Ger Tzedek. And tomorrow, Daniel and Shira Shirim will conclude the semester until after the trip, outside of Wednesday night classes. And then after the trip, we have 7 months, God willing, of straight yeshiva time. That's all for tonight. Have a great Lag BaOmer. And may everybody have a great rest of the week. And I'll see you tomorrow in class.